Hello, my name is Belal Fallah. I'm from Palestine. Today I would like to present the main findings of our research entitled Do Labor Market Opportunities Affect Labor Force Participation of Young Educated Females in Developing Countries? And we're taking Palestine as a case study. S- Briefly, I'm gonna discuss the context of this research and then move to the research objective, then discuss methodology and data, present very briefly the main findings, and then complete my presentation with discussing the main policy implications. Um, as we all know, existing literature have a consensus on positive linkages between the level of education and female labor force participation rate, but this is mainly the case in developed countries. However, for many developing countries, female labor force participation seems to grow little or even decrease despite the overtime gained in their education attainment. Palestine belongs to this group of countries. I'm going to give you some statistics. Between 1999 and 2011, the share of educated females, those with more than 12 years of education and aging between 29 and 54 years old, has doubled, rising exponentially from 17%. Markedly and very notably, over this period, labor force participation of this cohort has shown a sluggish pattern. In fact, it has decreased for the young educated females from 43% to 37%, while it's bounced at around 60% for the older educated females over the same period. Of course, there are many factors that can be utilized to explain changes in labor force participation rate, mainly from the supply side effects. However, in this research, we're going to focus on explaining change in labor force participation rate for young educated females utilizing the demand side effect, and we are taking descriptive statistics as our guidance. As you can see from this figure, this is the employment rate over time changes in employment rate across the educated cohorts for male and female, young and older cohorts. And as you can see, uh, the employment rate for the young educated cohort has been decreasing over the period between 1999 and 2011. This decrease has been documented over an extended period. So the research objective is to test the extent to which the negative demand shocks, the decrease we have documented in the employment rate for the young educated female, have been can be contributed to the or can be I'm sorry can explain the changes in the sluggish labor force participation rate of this uh, group. Specifically, we're gonna test whether the overall demand shock that matters, or it's about the cohort demand shocks that explain the sluggish labor force participation. As for the theoretical motivation, we are basically relying on the discouraged worker effect, which simply suggests that workers' decision to leave or join the labor market depends on labor market conditions. Generally, if the probability to find employment in the labor market decreases, individuals may remain outside the labor force or decide to leave it. As for the data, we will use an aggregated data at a district quarterly level, and we are going to use the labor force participation data that is collected and published by Palestine Central Bureau of Statistics labor force survey and cover the period of 2005 and 2011. We will limit the analysis to the West Bank. Gaza has experienced a recurrent wars and blockade, which may be hard to model using the regression analysis that I will discuss very briefly in a minute. The samples included in the analysis are the individuals with an age boundary between 15 and 54 and live as well as work in the West Bank 11 districts. Although we focus the analysis on the young educated females, we expand modeling to cover the other educated cohorts, covering young and older educated females, as well as older educated females. As well as for the methodology, we're going to use regression analysis, and particularly we're going to utilize instrumental variable approach. As for the model specification, as you can see in equation 1, the dependent variable is the growth rate of labor force participation for a given cohort. The main independent variable is the employment growth, um, the overall employment growth, um, the beta, the coefficients of employment growth is an elasticity measuring the effect of a percentage change in overall employment on the percentage change of labor force participation. For this model, we'll first test whether an overall changes in employment has any contributing factor to changes in labor force participation. The prior expectation simply increases in local demand will induce more individuals to join or remain in the labor market. As for the explanatory variable, we included a number of factors that we believe affect labor force participation. The main one of interest is education uh, growth rate per cohort. We also control for quarter fixed effect as well as district fixed effect. This is the main findings for the four cohorts, and as I said, we are basically interested to see the results for the young educated females. As we can see, the effect of the overall employment growth rate is insignificant, meaning the change or growth rate in labor force participation of this cohort is insensitive to the shocks in overall employment rate. The result is the same for young educated males. However, for the older educated males and females, the effect is positive and statistically significant at 5%. Well, a main concern of the results of this model is that we only utilize overall employment, and this may just mask demand shocks that are affecting different cohorts, or the effect is cohort specific. We carefully investigated the employment distribution across the four cohorts, and we document a couple of interesting patterns. First, most of the demand for educated workers comes from the service sector. And secondly, which is also very important to us, the service employment or employment in the service sector has a heterogeneous distribution across cohorts. This may just hint that um, the demand for young educated females might be different or has a different distribution than the demand for the other cohorts. Now, to model the differences in the demand shock across cohort, we made a little modification to the um, instrumental variable. Um, Now, the first term, uh, which is the national employment change, basically in the service subsector, while the second term is the distribution weight, which measures the cohorts employed in service subsector J relative to total employment for a given cohort in District D observed in the initial period. Um, so the difference between this instrument and the instrument we used in the overall employment is that the initial employment share in the latter is the measures the employment share in a given sector regardless of the cohort. As for the instrument variable in equation 3, it just measures the predicted service employment growth per cohort in a given district and a given quarter. Uh, this is the key findings, as you can see, and again we focus on the findings of the young educated females. Now, employment growth rate uh, for the young educated females in the service sector has a positive effect on their labor force participation rate. This effect is also positive and statistically significant for the older educated females, but the magnitude of of the effect for the latter is much smaller. We did in the model. The results also show that the effect, the cohort specific effect, is statistically insignificant for the male cohorts. In other words, this shows that changes in labor force participation rate for the male cohorts might be just insensitive to change in their employment. So what we show so far, here's the main message that we can take away from this presentation and this research. Labor force participation for young educated females causally respond to demand shock. However, the finding shows that general improvement in the overall employment or in the labor market at large may not lift all boats. It did not affect um, labor force participation rate for young educated females. What matters, according to our finding, the demand shock that affect sectors where they really work. The results of the econometric estimation, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the effect, suggest that decreasing labor demand for young educated females by 1% would on average decrease their labor force participation by about 1.3%. Uh, Finally, as for the policy implications, the finding shows that uh, it could be the case that devising policies that target young educated females are likely to enhance their linkages in the labor market. There are a couple of policies that we think might work. First, enhancing public employment for young educated females uh, could be a good instrument in this respect. We think that um, shifting more of the public employment to female and make it more gender balanced uh, could be a good instrument. Also, devising wage or employment subsidy might be another policy instrument to improve the demand for young educated females and ultimately boost their labor force participation rate. And on this point, I would like to thank you very much for your time and listening to my presentation. And that's it. Thank you very much.